The gravel crunched under my heels as I stepped through the iron gates of Blackwood Estate for the first time in 8 years. The mansion loomed in the distance, its columns bathed in the amber glow of lanterns strung across the courtyard. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. There was an unmistakable chill in the air, not from the breeze rolling in from the marsh, but from the way the guests shifted their eyes away from me. I caught fragments of their whispers, half-sentences cloaked in condescension. It was like watching a stage play I used to star in, now as an extra who'd shown up uninvited. I glanced up at the tall windows, imagining Grandad's silhouette behind one of them. He used to stand there, waiting for me to come home from school, holding out his hand with a caramel or a worn-out paperback novel. But those were softer years, before my father reminded everyone of their place, before mine was erased. A waiter nearly bumped into me, apologized, then moved along as if he hadn't seen me at all. And for a moment I questioned myself. Why did I come back? Was I that desperate for closure, or just foolish enough to think blood still mattered in this town? I stepped further into the party. The courtyard was full, but no one turned to greet me. My mother stood by the fountain, locked in conversation with some attorney I didn't recognize. She didn't look up. My brother, handsome in that empty sort of way, offered me a practiced smile, the kind politicians give strangers. I moved past him without stopping. Even the staff seemed uncertain of how to treat me. One of the caterers handed me a glass of champagne with hesitant hands, glancing over my shoulder like he expected someone to revoke the gesture. I looked at the place card table near the front doors. My name was missing. Instead, a small handwritten note listed me as Guest of Honours +1, a category usually reserved for distant acquaintances or last-minute girlfriends. The laughter around me felt sharper than usual. I caught snippets. Why is she even here? She should have known better. I stood still, fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. And then I saw it, the double doors at the far end of the hallway leading to the library. That's where the reading was happening. That's where they all were, lawyers, heirs, people with real invitations. I moved toward it, the echo of my heels carrying through the hall. But just before I reached the door, a hand touched my arm. I turned to find a man in a black suit, expression apologetic but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "this room is restricted. Only authorized names are allowed." I blinked. "I'm his granddaughter." His eyes didn't change. "Your name isn't on the list?" I stepped back. My throat tightened, but no tears came, only heat rising fast from my stomach to my face. I could see my brother through the glass, sitting comfortably in a leather chair, laughing. His voice rose above the others. They welcomed him like he was the chosen one. My hands trembled slightly, but I refused to move. "I was raised in that room," I muttered. The man didn't flinch. "I'm sorry." I wasn't sure how long I stood there, but eventually I turned away. Not defeated, just stunned. I didn't cry. There's a certain kind of humiliation that doesn't need tears. It lives quietly in your chest, pulsing like a second heartbeat. I made my way back toward the main garden. The gala was in full swing. Glasses clinked, violins played, someone gave a speech. That's when I heard him. My father. He raised his glass toward the crowd, then, without turning his head, said loudly, "Some children were never meant to live." There was a pause, a beat of stunned silence, then awkward laughter. Not the kind that follows a good joke, but the kind that tells you the joke was cruel and everyone's too scared not to laugh. I didn't need to look around to know they were all staring at me. My mother stared at her shoes. She never even glanced in my direction. The music resumed, but something had shifted. People didn't meet my eyes anymore, not even the ones who'd been polite before. I stood still, hands at my sides, letting the shame settle like dust on my skin. But deeper than the shame, there was something else, a silence inside me that felt heavier than rage, like a room with all the lights turned off. Later, after most guests had drifted indoors and the garden had emptied out, I found a quiet spot near the back fence. I sat alone on a cold stone bench. My thoughts unraveling, I kept replaying his words, "Never meant to live." I wondered how many times he'd thought it before he finally said it aloud. I pulled my coat tighter. Maybe they really did want me gone. Maybe I was just a reminder of everything they wished they could forget. But then, somewhere between the stillness and the hurt, something inside me flickered. If I walked away tonight, I'd be exactly who they believed I was. Insignificant. A mistake. I looked up at the stars, barely visible through the haze. No, respect isn't inherited, it's claimed. Blood doesn't make a family, recognition does. And I was done waiting to be recognized. That was the night I learned I didn't just lose my place, they erased me entirely. I walked back into the gala hall like I hadn't just been shut out of the one place I belonged. I kept my back straight, chin up, but inside, I was trying to breathe past the tight knot pressing into my chest. The chandeliers threw golden light across the walls, catching the edges of crystal glasses and polished silverware. Every detail was curated for old money approval. Portraits of our ancestors hung in judgment above the fireplace, men who'd built the Blackwood name on law, timber, and appearances. The whole room shimmered with expensive silence. I moved toward the long banquet table where family was already seated. My name wasn't there. I checked twice. Nothing. The seat assigned to me sat off to the side, near a podium where the staff rested empty trays. No nameplate, just a folding chair, the kind they pulled from a supply closet when someone extra showed up. I sat down slowly, hearing the rustle of silk dresses and whispers tightening around me. From this corner, I could see my mother smile at a guest, nodding politely. Her eyes swept the room and stopped just short of me, then continued on like I was part of the wall. She knew I was there. She chose not to see me. Someone leaned over and whispered, "Is she one of the caterer's kids?" Another voice, sharper, amused, answered, No, that's Ro. But let's not make a scene." I didn't make a scene. I held the silence in my mouth like I used to hold pennies as a kid, tight enough to hurt, but not enough to break skin. I looked up at the long table. There was my brother, Cormac, pouring wine for our uncle. The air, the rising star. His laugh was easy. He filled a space that used to be mine, like I'd been replaced so thoroughly it wasn't even a question anymore. Presence without acknowledgement. That's worse than being gone. Exile at least gives you distance. But this was being erased in real time. I watched them clink glasses, compliment each other's ties and jewelry, acting like this wasn't a funeral dressed up in pearls. Not a single person looked at me like I belonged, not even the ones I used to share summer porches with. I wasn't invisible, I was edited out. My grandfather once told me, "People may ignore you, but they can't erase what you do." I used to believe that, but tonight felt planned, too clean, too coordinated. This wasn't a mistake, it was a message. I stopped trying to connect. Instead, I observed the way someone only smiles with their teeth when they're lying, the sideways glances between cousins I used to trust. It hit me all at once. This wasn't about forgetting, this was about replacing. A voice called the room to attention. I turned. Cormac stood at the stage, a spotlight haloing his head. "Tonight," he said, "we honor not just legacy, but vision." A slideshow began behind him, photos of the Blackwood Charitable Foundation, initiatives, projects, language I knew by heart, because I wrote it. 3 years ago, when I worked in the office unpaid, designing strategy decks while Cormac played golf with donors. My words flickered across the screen, word for word. Legacy means responsibility. He delivered it like it was his own, like it came from some deep well of inspiration instead of my hands at 2 a.m., pouring into a laptop in the guest house. Applause broke like a wave. I didn't move. He's always been the visionary, a woman near me whispered. My fingers curled against my skirt. I didn't stand, didn't shout. That would have made me the unstable one. Emotional. Bitter. That's how they'd frame it. No. Let them think I was quiet. Let them mistake composure for defeat. You don't interrupt a lie. You outlive it. My heart slowed. Something sharpened behind my eyes. A choice settled in my spine. I wouldn't fight to be seen in their world. I'd build a new one where they couldn't ignore me if they tried. I stood slowly. Cormac was still basking in the spotlight, basking in applause for what wasn't his. I walked out the side door. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Strangers passed me without even a glance. A server smiled politely as if I were one of them. Outside the hall, the corridor was empty and cool. My heels echoed softly against the wood floors. I stopped at the far end near the emergency exit and leaned against the wall. They'd stolen my seat, my name, my work. But theft comes from fear, and that means they were afraid of me. Back inside, another round of applause rang out. I didn't look back. I left the ballroom for the invitation desk, heart pounding in my ears. The hush of marble halls swallowed my footsteps. I leaned over the laminated guest list and searched for my name. It wasn't there. Instead, blank lines stretched where it should have been. I glanced at the staff behind the desk. Faces pressed with tension. A clerk rustled papers, murmuring that line should read Roe Blackwood. Then paused. I swallowed. Exclusion was not a mistake tonight. It was intentional. The man ahead of me hovered, inspecting his own name card. I watched him fiddle with the print. His card was typed, pristine. Tonight I was a footnote, a gas station attendant perhaps. I stepped back, letting the crowds pass around me. No one offered a glance. My own blood let me vanish into wallpaper. Resentment simmered, slow and hot beneath my ribs. Lights dimmed in the banquet hall. The crowd shifted to face the stage. Cormac emerged, dressed sharply, his silhouette striking against a projection wall. He spoke of vision, of responsibility, of preserving the Blackwood legacy. The lines he spoke matched one of my old memos word for word, sent 3 years ago while I toiled in anonymity. Behind him, the slideshow displayed images, charts, branding designs I created. He said legacy means responsibility, and I froze. A ripple of applause broke the moment. Nobody gasped. No one turned to see my face in the crowd. A distant cousin leaned in. That was her idea, wasn't it? Their voice barely rose above a whisper. I kept my face still. Let them ask. Let them confront their own shame. A former classmate, once close, approached me with measured steps. She scanned my expression before whispering, "Are you sure that's yours?" Her voice cracked under expectation. I nodded silently. She swallowed. Fear twitched behind her eyes. She glanced at the stage, then away. I realized she had been coached to doubt, but not to deny. Her silence was a shield. I offered her a faint nod. I saw the regret in her hesitation. I returned to the fringe of the ballroom. The dessert plates gleamed. The murmur of wine glasses rose. I set up my notebook and pen, drafting margins with evidence, dates, comparisons. If they were stealing my words, I would harvest truth from every memory they tried to erase. I recalled grandfather saying quietly, "They can erase your name, but they cannot erase your story." It stung now, louder than memory. I stood, not to shout, not to storm the stage, but to reclaim my angle, my wits, my voice silent as a blade drawn. I left the hall through the side exit just as the music swelled again. Outside, humid night air pressed against me. I stood under the downlight by the patio door and glanced back. The ballroom's windows glowed behind Cormac. His silhouette loomed large, casting his shadow over mine. But mine was still there. They may have tried to delete me from the records. They forgot I can walk out of rooms. And memories, once spoken, never fully fade. I slipped away from the gala just as the servers cleared the dessert plates, and the violinist shifted to lighter music. The halls were dim, voices distant. I walked through corridors, thick with shadows and memories, family portraits staring down, silent witnesses. I felt exposed but steady in purpose. Behind the walls, a hidden study waited. That's where I found him. Desmond stood there, quiet as a breath. He held an envelope sealed with old wax. The label read, "For Roe." My heart pounded, too loud, too hopeful, and yet I stretched out my hand and took it. He said nothing at first. His face held the weight of years. Then he nodded. He left one more message he couldn't say publicly. Something trembled behind that calm. My fingers brushed the envelope's edge, hesitant. In the faint lamplight, I opened it. My grandfather's handwriting, elegant, deliberate. To my beloved grandchild, the letter began. It explained how shortly after his health declined, the will was altered without his clear consent. The inked words mentioned a project only I had championed, plans I'd drawn. My name, Roe, was named directly. Each line felt like a heartbeat echoing through time. I trembled. Relief and betrayal warred inside me. Desmond led me next through a narrow door behind the study into a hidden gallery. Dust motes floated in the low light. Monitors and film reels lined shelves. Recorders gathered neglect. Cables drooped. In that hush we found a tape, a brittle cassette with a label that read Legacy RB. We loaded it, the screen flickered. On tape, my grandfather's hands scrawled across parchment, leaning forward, speaking into a camera. Roe shall inherit, not for profit, but to protect what matters. He paused, his voice soft but firm. The frame flickered, then cut. The rest had been erased. I pressed pause. The room spun, evidence, truth. He had named me on tape. I looked at Desmond. He watched me, anxious now. "Why didn't you bring this sooner?" I asked. He sighed. He showed me affidavits, threatening letters from Bennett, blackmail hidden under legalese. He told me he held silence because someone powerful demanded it. "Use this now," he urged, "or they'll bury it deeper." I nodded, no hesitation. We retraced steps back toward the ballroom's outer ring. The night air greeted me when I crossed the threshold. The echo of final applause drifted through corridors. Behind me, inside, Cormac's silhouette stood center stage. I pushed into the hallway, clutching the envelope and the USB drive with the tape inside. My heart stilled itself. Now I had something more than doubt. Just as I reached the edge of the ballroom, a spotlight snapped on, blinding and sudden. A hush fell. Someone had called my name. I barely slept. The estate felt different at dawn, emptier, stripped of its illusions. Whatever warmth had once lived in these halls had long been buried under velvet curtains and marble pride. I rose before the staff began their quiet shuffle through corridors, and the silence followed me like a shadow. I didn't dress for anyone. I didn't rehearse explanations. I simply moved, knowing something inside me had shifted. The carpets along the east wing were unchanged, deep burgundy, worn by generations of confident footsteps. Mine echoed differently. I passed rooms where I once hid from arguments, corners where I listened to voices deciding my future without ever using my name. The air carried the faint trace of yesterday's candle smoke and champagne, but beneath it was something colder. Aftermath. I returned to my childhood room. They had kept it untouched, like a shrine to a daughter they never wanted. The pale blue wallpaper, the neatly made bed, the bookshelf of gifts never given. It was a room frozen in time, proof that pretending care is easier than offering it. I opened the small drawer on the nightstand. Inside, beneath a folded handkerchief, I found it, an old silver hairpin. My grandfather had given it to me when I turned 13. A reminder to hold your head high, he'd said. I sat on the bed, holding that pin between my fingers. I let the stillness do its work. Pain doesn't always scream. It settles, it shapes, it sharpens. And that morning it gave me clarity. The library called to me, not because I wanted comfort, but because answers often hide where no one bothers to look. I walked the length of the gallery hall, past portraits of men who rewrote history in their favor, until I reached the double doors. The library smelled of dust and cedar, lined with shelves my grandfather had tended himself. He catalogued everything with codes, small pencil marks only I ever noticed. I scanned the spines, leadership and legacy. I pulled it down. It felt heavier than it should. Inside were 3 letters tucked between pages on inheritance ethics, each addressed to Desmond, but never delivered. The handwriting was unmistakable. He wrote of plans for a media trust. Under my name, he wrote, "Rose sees what others ignore. Protect her from envy." My breath caught. He had seen what I was becoming, even as my family chose not to. But the last letter ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off as if interrupted. Fear threaded through his words. He knew something was coming. I took the letters with me to the rooftop terrace. The sun was barely rising, streaking the sky with muted orange. Bennett stood there, hands buried in coat pockets, staring at the horizon like it owed him something. He didn't turn when I approached. He wanted silence to speak for him, but I had learned silence could speak for me too. I sat beside him. We watched the light grow. "You silenced a voice that was meant to rise," I said calmly. "That silence won't last." He didn't flinch. "You were always too delicate for truth," he replied, barely shifting his gaze. "You don't understand what legacy demands." I looked at him. Delicacy isn't weakness, it's restraint, and mine just ended. He said nothing, but for the first time he blinked. I left him there and returned inside. My room felt different now, no longer a museum but a staging ground. I took out the video again, replaying each frame. This time I noticed it in the background behind my grandfather's desk. He pointed briefly toward a carved wooden box, something unspoken, a direction. I went back to the study. The box was where the video hinted. Inside, beneath legal folders, were sketches, drafts, formatted documents, all bearing his signature and my initials. My logo designs, project outlines, all time-stamped weeks before he died, proof that my work had been intended to see daylight. I laid every piece on the bed, paper, video, letter, each one a part of my stolen voice. I did not cry, I did not tremble. I simply opened my laptop and began building a timeline. Names, dates, evidence. When you've been silent long enough, truth becomes a blade. The sun had fully risen when the phone rang. No caller ID, no voice on the other end, just a single piano note, the one he used to hum when he was about to change everything. The day I walked into the Blackwood Trust offices felt like crossing into enemy territory. Chicago's grid lines of steel and glass pressed in around me, hours of train travel behind me, resolve heavy in my pocket. I clutched the grandfather file tight, handwritten memos, evidence of the trust, the videotape, everything I needed to matter. At the reception desk, the clerk glanced at the envelope, then back at me, lips pinched tight. "I need to see your credentials," she said. I laid the file on the counter. They hesitated. That moment held everything. Finally, they made space for me to rise to the waiting boardroom. 12 people sat around the long mahogany table, suits soft in their power. Bennett entered late, exuding arrogance. He produced a fresh will, copies showing me completely removed as heir. His smile was cold. I stood, placing the video footage and Desmond's affidavits before them. The room fell silent. Eyes narrowed. A senior board woman watched, unblinking. Bennett spoke smoothly. Looks like she manipulated the tape. He leaned forward, voice measured, insinuating. Some murmur ripple. Edited footage, he's pushing it. My stomach clenched, but I held my posture. I looked at each board member. You think I care about money? I want what's right. Record. Truth. I tapped timestamp evidence, handwriting matches, notarized papers from Desmond, mismatch in Bennett's timeline, crafted after grandfather's coma. I said, You played with my silence for years. That ends tonight. Chair called for a vote. The tension was thick. Desmond abstained under duress. I expected pushback, suspicion, but not betrayal from within. Marla, the only other woman, voted against me. My blood froze. She'd been quietly close to Bennett. Her vote broke me open. Board chairs looked stabbed. Betrayal isn't thunder, it's the sound of one handshake undoing years. As I left the chambers, disillusioned but not broken, a young lawyer stepped forward. She slid me a card. You're not the first he buried. Call me. Her eyes bore secrets. My resolve steeled. I opened my laptop on a bench outside the building and uploaded the video to a secure server. 10 minutes later, I watched the file disappear, deleted remotely. My breath caught. I hadn't feared silence in years, but now they were trying to erase me again. Outside the Charleston courthouse, the afternoon sun bore down like a reminder of how exposed I was. Cameras flashed. Journalists murmured. Through the chaos, I felt small and alive. Security screened me. Metal detectors buzzed. I straightened the collar of my jacket and recalled grandfather's voice. Tell truth even to empty rooms. He meant courage might echo first in silence. Inside, the courtroom waited, Bennett's legal team in dark suits, smirks barely hidden, eyes eager. When the judge entered, the chatter ceased. Desmond stood and presented the video evidence, the affidavits, the draft wills stamped with my name and dates. Bennett countered with a new copy, claims of tampering, challenges to chain of custody. He spoke with practiced tone. I remained calm, heart pacing, watching every facial shift. At cross-examination, I laid out inconsistencies, the will drafted after grandfather's coma, comparisons of handwriting matching mine, the omissions in Bennett's document that were glaring. The judge leaned forward once, eyebrows raised. The balance wavered. Meanwhile, at the trust's headquarters, the leak happened. A whistleblower released a board memo. Proof Bennett forged grandfather's signature on the disputed will. The public document went viral. Board members hurried, panic flickering across faces. Cormac's empire of confidence cracked. His allies exchanged nervous glances. Witnesses texted each other, calling meetings. I watched the tremors across his facade. Vindication brewed, but I couldn't let pride blind me. After court, I found Bennett outside the building, pacing. I approached without hesitation. What do you say now? I asked. He raised a brow. You'll regret this, he said. I squared my shoulders and replied, Your threats are louder than you think, but I have nothing left to lose. His smirk faltered. He saw I'd shifted the battlefield. I did not ask for mercy. The judge re-entered. The hallway stilled. My pulse pounded. He opened his lips and said, I find the new will admissible. This court recognizes Roe Blackwood. Relief flickered. Some gasped. Others bowed their heads. The room pivoted. It might not be over, but the walls were breaking. I met with Ava at sunrise in her small rented office at the edge of town. We set up a lightweight camera, mic clipped to my collar. My voice was steadier than I felt, precise, unhurried. Ava recapped the accumulation of letters, the video evidence, the gospel of rejection that spanned years. We sat side by side, sunlight filtering through blinds, and told the story piece by piece. I showed her blueprints, drafts, the petition I was barred from seeing. By noon, the article was live. The Blackwood air they tried to silence. Within hours, my email lit up with messages from strangers. I thought I was alone in this. My own family erased me too. For the first time, I wasn't invisible to the world. I felt seen. Weeks of war correspondences emerged with the mail. One envelope stood out, no stamp, torn edges. Inside, a shaky letter from Grace, my grandfather's longtime housekeeper. She remembered a heated argument, Bennett pressing Desmond, whispering about erasing the girl. She offered to testify. My fingers threatened to shake. She said she always believed I was the one he was proudest of. I stood rooted in grief and gratitude. I arranged a car to fetch her from a small cottage beyond town. Desmond and I dove into the trust's financials. Hidden in shell accounts, we found it. The Blackwood Trust, partially activated in my name 5 months ago. It wasn't for property. It funded a local media lab, scholarships, training for underserved youth. It bore my childhood nickname, Little Ro, who sees everything. I followed the trail to a modest centre down a side street. Inside, kids worked on old Macs, editing short films, weaving stories. A brass plaque read, "In memory of Granddad's vision." My chest tightened. They were already living the mission. That evening, I asked Ava to accompany me to the town hall's open mic. The room filled slowly. Neighbours, students, distant cousins. I stepped to the microphone. "Legacies aren't what you inherit, they're what you protect," I said. I spoke of trust, truth, what I lost, what I reclaimed. I pledged to keep the mission alive, not for revenge, but for purpose. The room felt heavy with empathy. Cameras flashed. Journalists leaned forward. My whispers became their headlines. Still, my victory felt vulnerable. That night, Desmond warned me. Bennett planned a final move, covert asset transfers offshore. He'd received inside word through legal channels. I drafted the injunction. I phoned local media to time their stories for the hearing. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo of Bennett standing beside someone I used to trust. I felt the walls quake. Trust is fragile, even in victory. The courtroom felt smaller this time, maybe because I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The reporters had shown up again, packing into the wood-panelled benches, scribbling in notepads, adjusting their phones. I stood at the clerk's desk with a copy of the injunction in hand, the kind of document I used to think only lawyers understood. Now I could read every line with clarity. Bennett showed up 5 minutes late, as usual. He scanned the crowd, then me. His face was lined with tension, but he tried that old tactic. Smile soft, voice low, trying to bait sympathy. "You really want to drag this into the public eye again?" he asked, brushing past. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The paper trail was in my hands. Grace's letter, Ava's recordings, money, everything documented, time-stamped, backed by more voices than just mine. When the judge took the bench, I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I told the truth again, like I always had. Simple, clear, calm. I looked the judge in the eye. He listened. The ruling came fast. Bennett's asset transfers blocked. The trust reinstated under my name. The gavel echoed once and I breathed out something I hadn't known I was holding for years. Later that afternoon, I found the note tucked in my windshield. Folded twice, no name, just a time and a place. The old gazebo in the park behind the school. I went alone. She was already there when I arrived. Eliza, my nanny, my protector, my betrayer. She stood hunched, hands clenched in front of her like a child waiting for punishment. I owed his father, she said before I could open my mouth. Bennett knew it, held it over me. You helped him, I said quietly. You knew what he was doing? I saved your life once, she whispered. You fell into the creek, remember? I jumped in before your mother even noticed. I did remember. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I didn't know how to stop what I'd started. I didn't know how to make it right. I could have screamed, I could have demanded more, but I didn't. I release you, Eliza, I said, for both our sakes. We stood there in silence. The wind stirred the dry leaves around our feet. That evening, Desmond and I returned to the estate. One last time. The house felt hollow, stripped of its illusions. In the library he found it, a dusty VHS tape inside a carved wooden box, marked only with my name. I didn't expect what I saw when we played it. My grandfather's face filled the screen, older, frailer than I remembered, but clear-eyed. Ro, he said, if you're seeing this, then you've made it through. You always saw beyond the surface. Not because you wanted to fix me, but because you listened. You were the only one who ever did. He paused. I left you more than money. I left you the mission. You'll know what to do with it. I cried, not because it hurt, but because for the first time in my life, I felt fully known by him. I didn't keep the house. I turned down the title, but I kept the lab. I kept the scholarship fund. I wrote a letter to the town paper. What legacy really means. I signed it, Ro Blackwood. Granddaughter, builder, listener. Then I packed my car. I started reaching out to small towns across the country, offering workshops to kids with stories to tell. Kids like I'd once been, silenced by systems too old to question. Before I left, I visited the tree house behind our old home. The steps were rotting, the boards sagged, but it still stood. I crawled inside and placed a folded copy of the court, ruling under the loose floorboard right where I used to hide my drawings. My voice, my truth, that place used to hold my silence. Now it holds something else. He left me more than money, I whispered. He left me a voice.